Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a story today. Well, a real head scratcher. Think. A small Italian village, whispers of secrets and conspiracies, and a whole lot of
Sounds
questions.
intriguing. What's our starting point for this deep dive?
We're drawing from a YouTube series, actually, a channel called Bruce Pickert 70 put together these videos titled the Unico series. And the creators, well, they claim to have uncovered some pretty disturbing stuff in this village, stuff that made them ultimately have to flee.
So they're presenting themselves as what, like whistleblowers? People silenced for trying to expose the truth?
That's the gist, yeah. And they go deep, man. They touch on everything from post-war fascism to, get this, shadowy financial networks manipulating world events. They even name drop some pretty heavy hitters.
Like who?
We got Alan Dulles, former CIA director, you know. Then there's Karl Wolf, an SS general. And let's not forget Gianni Valerio Borghese, the Black Prince. He was like a hardcore Italian commando leader.
So we're talking about figures with some serious historical baggage. What's the connection the creators are making between them?
They seem to be suggesting that, hold on to your hats here, defeated fascists were, like, secretly redeployed into NATO after World War II.
Okay, now that's a bold claim. Are they implying NATO was infiltrated by, essentially, the very ideology it was created to oppose?
That's the implication. They go so far as to call it a new form of universal fascism. Now, I'm not sure what exactly they mean by that, but it sounds pretty ominous, right?
It does raise questions about the potential for ideologies to persist and evolve, even in the face of defeat. So how do they back up this claim?
Well, one of the big things they point to is Operation Gladio. You familiar with that?
Gladio, yeah. That was a clandestine NATO network during the Cold War, supposedly set up to resist a Soviet invasion.
Right, that's the official story. But these videos, they paint a much darker picture. They claim Gladio was actually used to, get this, destabilize Europe.
Destabilize, you mean through?
False flag operations, acts of terrorism, basically, that were then pinned on leftist groups to, like, sway public opinion. They call it the strategy of tension.
The idea that you create chaos and fear to justify a crackdown on, well, on anything that threatens those in power.
Yep. Pretty messed up, huh? And they throw out some shocking stats too. Apparently, in Italy alone, Gladio operations resulted in over 14,500 acts of violence. We're talking 491 deaths and over 1,100 injuries.
Wow. If those numbers are accurate, that's a staggering level of orchestrated violence.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, if this network is real, how far does its influence reach, and what else might they be capable of?
The videos then shift gears a bit, focusing on Venice.
Venice. What's the Venetian connection here?
They present this idea that Venetian families, back when Venice was this powerful maritime republic, they played a major role in shaping, well, global finance as we know it.
Interesting. So they're tracing a line from these ancient Venetian families to, like, modern institutions.
Yeah, they mentioned things like the Bank of Amsterdam, the Bank of England, these institutions that, according to them, were essentially established by Venetian families who, like, transferred their wealth and influence northward as Venice's political power declined.
So are they suggesting that this Venetian influence, like, never really went away?
It seems that way. They connect it to, well, even to Mussolini's rise to power and, get this, the financing of the Vatican.
Hold up. Venetian aristocrats funding the Vatican, how do they even connect those dots?
They point to figures like Count Volpi di Misurata, a big-shot Venetian aristocrat back in the day. He had a lot of sway, politically and economically. They claim he was instrumental in, helping Mussolini rise to power.
Send the Vatican angle.
That's where they bring in Bernardino Nogara. He was the guy managing the Vatican's finances back in the early 1900s. The videos suggest his financial dealings were somehow tied to these, let's call them Venetian networks.
It's like they're saying these networks are like the puppet masters behind the scenes calling the shots in global finance and politics.
That's the narrative they're weaving. And to add to it, they delve into two specific coup attempts that supposedly aimed to destabilize Italy back in 1970. The Rosa dei Venti plot, and you've probably heard of this one, the Golpe Borghese.
Wait, so they're claiming these Venetian networks were involved in actual coup attempts. That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and they tie it back to that strategy of tension idea we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
They're suggesting these coup attempts were part of a bigger plan to, like, create chaos and then swoop in with a more authoritarian solution.
So not just influencing things from the shadows, but actively trying to overthrow the government.
That's what they're suggesting. And it all gets even more interesting, or maybe disturbing, when you consider the creator's own story. They claim to have stumbled upon these disturbing truths in their own village, their birthplace, as they call it, and that's why they had to flee.
Wow. So they're not just presenting some abstract theory here. They're saying they witnessed something that made them fear for their safety and ultimately drove them to expose it all. What could have been so terrifying that it forced them to abandon their home? That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stick with us. So last time, we were talking about these Venetian networks and the possibility that they were involved in some pretty shady stuff, even coup attempts in Italy. But what really got to me was the creators' claim that they uncovered all of this in their own village, their birthplace. It's pretty scary to think that something like that could be going on right under your nose.
Yeah, it really adds another layer to this whole thing, doesn't it? Like, it's not just some abstract conspiracy theory. It's something they say they personally witnessed.
They even talk about their village as a place full of, like, hidden agendas and secrets, you know? It makes you
Yeah.
wonder what kind of stuff they saw there. What could have been so bad that they felt they had to flee?
Well, according to them, when they tried to go to the authorities, nothing happened. Like, they claim they sent letters and reports to the Palace of Justice, and those just disappeared. Poof, gone.
That's creepy. Imagine trying to report something important and having your evidence just vanish like that. It makes it sound like someone was trying to keep things quiet.
And it didn't stop there.
Yeah.
When they tried to go public to share their story through their YouTube videos, they claimed they ran into even more roadblocks.
Like what? What kind of roadblocks?
Well, they said their website got messed with, like someone was deliberately trying to bury it in search results so no one would find it.
Seriously, how is that even possible?
They actually get into the technical details of it, which I have to say is kind of impressive. It shows a level of, technical know-how that most people wouldn't have.
So they're implying it wasn't just some random glitch, but someone was, like, actively trying to silence them.
Yeah, that's their claim. And when you combine that with the disappearing reports and their claims that the media wouldn't touch their story, it does make you wonder if there was a deliberate effort to keep them quiet.
It's kind of unsettling to think about, you know? Like, even in this day and age with the internet and everything, someone could still have that much control over information.
It definitely raises some questions about who has the power to manipulate what we see and hear online. It reminds us that we need to be careful, think critically about the information we're consuming, especially online.
Totally. So, going back to the Venetian connection, they're not just saying these families had influence in the past, but they're still pulling strings today, right?
Right. They point to figures like Count Volpi di Misurata, who, as we discussed, was linked to the fascist movement. They're suggesting that people like him weren't just isolated cases, but rather they were part of this ongoing lineage of Venetian influence in Italian politics and finance.
And what about Bernardino Nogara, the Vatican's financial guy? How do they connect him to this whole Venetian network thing?
To be honest, the videos are a little vague on the specifics. They don't actually show any, financial records or anything that directly links him to these networks.
So, what are they basing their claim on?
It seems like they're relying more on historical context and the idea that Nogara's financial decisions were, well, suspiciously aligned with the interests of those powerful Venetian families.
So, it's more of a suggestion than a concrete accusation, then?
Yeah, that's how I see it. They're essentially building a circumstantial case, drawing connections based on historical relationships and perceived patterns of influence.
It's like they're saying, hey, look at all this. Doesn't it seem a little fishy to you? Like maybe there's something more going on here than meets the eye.
Exactly. And they tie all of this back to the coup attempts, the Rosa dei Venti and the Golpe Borghese. They argue that those plots to destabilize Italy weren't just the actions of some fringe groups, but that they were somehow connected to or maybe even supported by these larger networks.
So they're saying that it was all part of a bigger plan, like to create chaos and
Yeah.
then use that as an excuse to install a more authoritarian regime.
That's their argument.
Hmm.
And to make that connection, they specifically bring up Stefano Del Chai.
Who's that?
Del Chai was a pretty notorious neo-fascist activist, known for his involvement with all sorts of right-wing extremist groups. The videos suggest that his actions, and maybe even the coup attempts themselves, were part of that larger strategy of tension we talked about, orchestrated by those in power.
Wow. It's a pretty chilling thought.
It is. They're painting a picture of a system where powerful people are working behind the scenes, pulling the strings. They use violence, manipulation, propaganda, whatever it takes to get what they want.
It really makes you wonder if even some of this is true. How deep does this rabbit hole go?
That's a good question. And it's something we'll continue to unpack in the final part of our deep dive. We'll take a closer look at the creator's claims of censorship and suppression, and we'll explore what this whole story might say about the challenges of finding the truth in the digital age.
Man, this whole story just gets you thinking, Like how much of what we see and hear is really the whole truth, especially online where things can be manipulated so easily.
Yeah, the creators of these videos, they definitely play on that fear. Remember, they claim they've been through it themselves, saying their website was like deliberately hidden from search results and that their attempts to reach out to the media went nowhere. And even official reports they filed just vanished.
That's wild. If that's true, it's like someone's controlling the narrative, right? Straight out of some dystopian movie. But how do we know if it's really suppression or just, bad luck or some kind of technical glitch?
That's where critical thinking comes in. We can't just take their word for it, but we also shouldn't dismiss it completely. It's all about looking for those patterns, finding evidence to back things up, and considering why someone would want to suppress this information in the first place.
They did say they had technical details about how their website was manipulated. Have you had a chance to look into that at all?
I have, and it's definitely a little suspicious. They describe some pretty specific techniques that could be used to make a website harder to find, things that the average person wouldn't really know how to do.
So it sounds like whoever did it knew what they were doing.
Yeah. Now, proving that someone did it on purpose is always tough. Maybe there are other explanations, things we haven't thought of, but their claims, along with those missing reports and the media ignoring them, it paints a pretty clear picture.
It definitely raises questions about like who has the power to do something like that? If they can manipulate information that effectively, what does that say about our chances of actually finding the truth?
That's the big question, isn't it? We're bombarded with information all the time, but how much of it is actually real? And how can we tell what to trust?
This whole deep dive has really made me think about that. We started with these videos claiming this huge conspiracy involving fascists, secret networks, and cover-ups. But the more we dig, the more it becomes about how we sift through all this information and figure things out for ourselves.
It's a journey, not a destination. This deep dive has given us a way to look at this topic, a starting point. But now it's up to each listener to decide what they believe, what they want to research more, and what conclusions they come to.
If I wanted to keep digging into this, I think I'd start with those claims of censorship and suppression. Are there others out there saying similar things? Are there any researchers or journalists who've looked into this kind of thing?
That's a great place to start. And don't forget the historical context. Learning more about people like Alan Dulles, Carl Wolf, Junio Valerio Borghese, and Licio Gelli can help us understand how networks and ideologies can stick around even after major historical events.
And what about those Venetian families and their influence on global finance and politics? Is that something worth digging into more?
Absolutely. Looking into the history of Venetian banking and trade, tracing those family lines and seeing how they might connect to things happening today, that could be really interesting. But remember, be critical, look for different perspectives, and weigh the evidence carefully.
This deep dive has been a wild ride. We've talked about history, conspiracies, and personal stories. It's a story that really makes you think about power, information, and the forces that shape our world.
It also reminds us that searching for the truth is a process, something that never really ends. It takes critical thinking, careful analysis, and a healthy dose of skepticism.
So to everyone listening, we leave you with this. What parts of this story grabbed your attention? What questions are still swirling in your mind? Where would you go from here to explore this web of intrigue? The journey is yours to take.